France had the world's most powerful army, artillery, high-tech rifles, seasoned officers, and for nearly 16 years, they could not defeat one African ruler. Every time French commanders believed victory was close, he vanished. When they captured his cities, he built new ones. When they blocked one trade route, he opened another. When they destroyed one army, he had already built the next. The New York Times called him the most dangerous antagonist Europeans had had to deal with for nearly 13 years straight. But here's what makes this story remarkable. This man was not born a king, not born an emperor, not born with a single soldier. So how did he build an empire powerful enough to humiliate France for nearly 2 decades? This is the story of Samori Touré, the man who turned resistance into a science. Before we go further, hit subscribe, because this channel exists to tell the African stories your textbooks left out. Around 1830, in a village called Manyambaladugu in present-day Guinea, a boy named Samori was born. Until age 20, he was just a trader, nothing extraordinary. He moved goods between the forests and the savannah, learning geography, learning supply routes, learning how to negotiate with people from dozens of different backgrounds. Skills that seemed unremarkable at the time, skills that would later make him nearly impossible to defeat. Then the fight came to him. When a local king named Sori Birama captured Samori's mother in a slave raid, Samori didn't just pay a ransom, he traded his life for hers, offering to serve in the king's army in exchange for her freedom. What began as a desperate rescue mission became an education in warfare. He watched how armies moved, how leaders earned loyalty, how victories were won, and how mistakes destroyed kingdoms. He was building a mental library, one France would spend the next several decades paying for. By the 1850s, Samori had begun gathering followers, a handful of loyal men, then dozens, then hundreds. His reputation spread on its own. People noticed his discipline, his fairness. By 1878, he was a Fama, a sword-bearer, a military leader, uniting the scattered chiefs of the Milo River Valley. But Samori understood something most conquerors never grasp. Armies alone cannot build empires. Empires need food systems, trade networks, a legal structure people trust. In 1884, he took the title Almami, a religious and political leader, giving his state legitimacy and uniting his people under one shared identity. He wasn't just building an army, he was building a state. By the mid-1880s, Samori was at the top of his game. His empire was massive, covering what we now know as Guinea, Mali, Sierra Leone, and the Ivory Coast, a self-sufficient African state, with its own professional army, its own laws, a sophisticated tax system funding it all, built entirely from nothing, by a trader who once traded his freedom to save his mother. But while Samori was building his dream, a group of men in a room in Berlin were busy carving it up. In 1884, European diplomats sat down and drew lines across a map of Africa. Without a single African in the room, they thought they had already won. They were wrong. France wanted to link its colonies in Senegal with the interior. There was one problem. Samori's empire sat directly in their path. France sent an ultimatum: withdraw from a key trading center. Samori refused to be ordered out of his own territory. The war that followed would last longer than any French commander expected. This was not a tribal militia. This was a professional army of over 30,000 men, armed with modern European rifles, acquired through Samori's own trade networks. At first he won outright, but France had an endless supply of reinforcements from across their global empire. Samori had only what he could build himself. By 1889, he signed peace treaties with France. For a moment, it looked like the war might end. It didn't last. France used the ceasefire to quietly destabilize him from within, encouraging local rebellions, testing his control. When Samori realized what was happening, He understood something that would define the rest of his life. There would be no lasting peace with France. Only war or surrender. He chose war. What happened next is the part military historians still study today. When he could no longer win battles outright, he invented an entirely new way to survive: the scorched earth. Think about the brutal genius of this. Samurai couldn't outgun France, so he made the African landscape itself his weapon. Every village he evacuated, burned; every well, destroyed; every field, scorched; a thriving village, reduced to smoke and ash within hours. French armies advancing into his territory found nothing but ash, no food, no water, no shelter. He didn't just retreat. He conquered new territory while retreating, building a second empire, while denying France the spoils of the first. He moved his entire capital multiple times. Every time France thought they'd cornered him, there was nothing left to capture but smoke. But the strategy had a price. The famines it caused began to affect his own people and soldiers. There was no version of this war that came without a cost. By 1898, after 16 years of war, the pressure became unsustainable. His attempt to ally with the Asante failed. Trade routes were blocked. France now had nothing left to distract them. Every resource turned toward one goal: find Samurai. On September 29, 1898, a French force, led by Captain Henri Gouraud, surprised his camp at Guillemot. He wasn't defeated in open battle. He was caught by surprise. France charged him with treason, exiled him to a remote island on the Ogooué River in Gabon, thousands of miles from the empire he built. There he contracted pneumonia, died in exile on June 2, 1900. He never saw West Africa again. But here's what France could never erase. For 16 years, a traitor who started with nothing forced one of the most powerful empires on earth into a war it never expected. He proved Africa possessed sophisticated states and military brilliance long before colonial intervention, and his bloodline didn't end in exile. He is the great-grandfather of Ahmed Sékou Touré, the first president of independent Guinea, the man who built West Africa's last great pre-colonial empire. Has a direct line to the man who led Guinea back to freedom 60 years later. The resistance didn't end, it just changed form. France had the rifles, the artillery, the resources. It still took them 16 years to capture one man who started with nothing but a plan.